Our first speaker is Selena Rezvani, co-president of Women's Roadmap, author, speaker, and consultant.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn, and welcome to all of you. What a thrill to get to be here today on such a momentous occasion here with Mills. In the short time I have with you, I'd like to share a bit about what makes the next generation of women leaders tick. I want to talk about what motivates this generation of women, what keeps them up at night and worries them, what interests them, and how they picture their futures unfolding. I want to say, though, that much of what you are going to hear about when you hear about Generation Y women, women 18 to 29, that's really who I'm going to focus on today. Often you'll hear things about millennials that are negative, like that they're entitled, or that they're Generation Me, as they've been called. I'd like to take us on a slightly different track today. And I'd like to get us thinking about the incredible strengths of this group, some of the talents and abilities they have, and how they're going to bring those to the workplace and really shake it up. Starting out, you've heard a bit about this point, but this cohort is more educated than any set of women before them. They're coming up in a time where women gain 59% and 60% of bachelor's and graduate degrees, and where we've just surpassed men when it comes to doctoral education. This is so much more than a nice to have on our resumes, and I know I don't need to tell this audience that. This is a bargaining chip that women can use to help close the wage gap and to get those leadership roles where we have a dismal representation right now. Something really interesting about this group of women is that, unlike generations before them, they don't put a high prize on traditional pursuits like having money in the bank, or finding a partner and settling down, or even moving rungs up the ladder and having what we've all come to know as success at work. This group favors so much more having self-reliance and having independence, their #1 value. I want to look at something different that you don't hear about as much with this group of women, and that is they have this incredible asset of a global perspective. They really look at diversity and inclusion and welcoming many voices into the conversation in a different way. In fact, 91% of these women say there's nothing unusual about interracial dating. It's perfectly normal. 6 in 10 of this cohort of millennials says that the immigrant population in the United States greatly enhances our society. Think about that, if you will, for a minute when it translates to a leadership skill at work. Last time I checked, we desperately need that kind of mindset and approach to inclusion, particularly in our very global workplace, very matrixed, complicated global workplace, where we need to hear a lot of voices. So some really, really neat traits and perspectives this group is bringing to us. All that said, guess what's the most important to them? A job is only as good as its ability to give them a personal life. For this group, they have said, my #1 characteristic is that I don't want to spend my whole life at work. I heard someone say the other day, I don't just want to be alive on the weekends. It's not enough. So much so that this group will say, I'll give up money, I'll give up prestige, I'll give up the title if I can work less. That's how important family time, developing relationships, having a life is to me. You know, I made an assumption, and it was a wrong one, and I think I'm not the only one. And that was that surely if you grew up with a mom who had a big career, you would want to go do the same, maybe even expand on it and step it up. But what we found is that the majority of women who grew up with a mom who was, say, working 60 hours, was the professor, the law partner, the banker, don't want to emulate their mothers, don't want to mimic that path. Their biggest reason is that it's too black and white. Why do I have to opt in to the workforce and go full throttle, making all kinds of sacrifices, or opt out and stay home? You know, this is a group that wants the shades of gray in the middle. They don't want to have to conform to this way or that way. We're going to hear a lot, and you've probably read some things that get at this, but for the most part, the work world seems to be going in this direction, while Gen Y women's wants and needs, even demands, seem to be going in this direction. And I want to tell you a little bit about what I mean. There is a bit of friction and a divide. Specifically, the Department of Labor tells us that the average worker is working more hours in a week than we have in years. And if you look at this graph, the middle section that's cross-hatched represents the recession, where you see hours take a nosedive. But if you think about that for a minute, young people today are joining workforces and cultures that are more demanding, not less so, in terms of performance expectations and giving face time, putting up that face time in the office. That certainly sounds like an area of friction and an area where Gen Y women can positively change things. I'm a big believer that if workplaces become more flexible and adapt to this group, everybody is going to benefit. It's not just a way to engage the young people. This is the last data point I want to share with you, and it's my favorite data point because I think it says so much about young women today. When asked, what do you want to do? What is your top career aspiration? Boy, did I think CEO would be higher. And in fact, what young women are saying is, no, I don't want the job. Look at those people's withering relationships. Look at their lack of personal time. And this is counterintuitive for a lot of us, because most of us think, who, if not this generation of women, is going to charge the C-suite and become the corporate CEO that we haven't seen in large enough numbers? Same thing happens with the President of the United States. Do you want this job? An even smaller number of women want that job. And the chief reason being a flat-out disinterest in politics, and that same work-life integration issue. So really interesting to think about the fact that we have these ready-made molds and paths, and they're not engaging young women. They're not exciting them in the way that entrepreneurship really is. And I think that makes sense when we think about the fact that independence is so important to this group. Then surely you're going to want a career that you can shape on your own terms. As we look ahead at this powerhouse of women, and they really are a powerhouse, I think one of the considerations we need to think about is let's not underestimate them. Let's not confuse their challenging of how things are done for disinterest or for opting out somehow of the workplace. If anything, this group is not shrinking from challenge or from working hard. They're trying to redefine how it's done. The one other thought I'd like to leave you with is the different generations of women at work. I think there's something to that, and we don't hear about it that often. But the truth is there's so much that unites women. But when you look at some of our really shaping life events, our biggest obstacles, our greatest goals, they're different. They're different across the generations. What one generation abhors and rejects, another covets And we're seeing that in some of the data we're looking at today. This group's brass ring is very different than any group of women before them. And you know, the term, I can have it all, it's really beginning to mean something different. And I think what these women are offering, how they're defining success, is really something to behold.